Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this weekend edition. Hey, it's the weekend, yes, and there is a lot that's happening out there in Brisbane, as we have seen that all the functions and events are still taking place, well, under those restrictive conditions, but nevertheless they are taking place, and which is quite good to see. On this Saturday, the 17th of July, looking outside the window, it's a nice and sunny day here in Brisbane, and the temperature at this point in time is a very comfortable 17 degrees. Might be a bit cold for us some, but it is feeling up here where we are. It's feeling rather comfortable. It's a good feeling there. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we got so much to talk about and so many things to get through. But first of all, Victoria. What's happening there? So it's entering the 5th lockdown.
An all too familiar sight in Melbourne, desolate streets and empty trams, as Victorians woke to a 5th lockdown. But while most are once again learning and working from home, it's particularly tough without internet.
It's meant that we've had to go back to paper-based learning materials.
Almost 500 homes on Mount Dandenong are still without broadband after last month's storms, including the local primary school. Its students had only just been allowed back in the classroom. Local parents are worried about their kids.
She's just inside doing not much. We don't really have any internet for her to even be watching Netflix today.
6 new cases were recorded in Victoria today, including more stranger-to-stranger transmission. An asymptomatic man in his 60s has so far infected 8 others, including 2 men at the Young and Jackson's pub on Saturday before he went to the footy.
He is uniquely very, very infectious.
A 4th person has picked up the virus from the Carlton-Geelong AFL match in the MCC. They were most likely infected in the Percy Beams bar or the bathroom.
And again, we're back in the world of very fleeting transmission occurring.
Thousands of students from Bacchus Marsh Grammar are on alert after more teachers there tested positive.
We've done it before with the Delta variant. We can do it again, and we will do it again.
While some regional Victorians may get an early reprieve from lockdown, for many it's not enough.
Absolutely unfair. We've had no cases here. We're 300 kilometres away from Melbourne.
The latest outbreak was sparked by 2 removalists who brought the virus over the border from New South Wales. Removalists from red zones are now banned from entering Victoria for a fortnight, and all interstate truckies must get tested every 3 days.
If you're coming from a red zone moving furniture, no, you aren't. So we think that's the appropriate thing to do.
While it's too early to say whether the Victorian lockdown will end as planned on Tuesday night, Daniel Andrews says he'll try to get the state back to normal as soon as possible. Over the next few days, the focus won't necessarily be on the number of cases, but how many have been infectious in the community. Bridget Rollins.
And of course, that would be the case, looking at the community and how many are infected in that community. Look, there had been talks every time to close the borders and all the things. But when we look at people like removalists who have to, take things from here to there, they were given a special pass and they were told to work under certain conditions. Did that happen or not? And here's a report on their route, where they travelled, how they did, and of course some of the CC footage that security cameras have discovered that they actually did not follow the rules.
A crew of 3 men left Sydney's west, and their first known stop was for petrol in the New South Wales town of Gundagai at 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday the 8th of July on their way to Melbourne. 8 hours later, the trio made their first known stop in Victoria at a petrol station in Calcallo and a fast food outlet on Melbourne's northern fringe. They then headed for Craigieburn and delivered furniture there to a family of 4. The crew then drove to Maribyrnong in Melbourne's west, spending about 4 hours at the Ariel Apartments moving furniture. That apartment building was ordered into lockdown after some of the residents tested positive. CCTV footage and witness statements showed the men were not wearing masks and therefore breaching the conditions of their Victorian travel permit. Heading west, there was a 2-hour stop-off at Balan in the early evening for food, petrol and a shower, and the men spent the night in Victoria. The next morning they travelled to South Australia, dropping into a roadhouse at Tailem Bend to buy petrol and coffee. A member of the crew was contacted by New South Wales Health on that day, Friday the 9th of July, and told he was a primary close contact of another positive case. Still in South Australia, the trio headed to McLaren Vale to deliver furniture for a Western Sydney family. On their way back, they stopped again at Tailem Bend in the late afternoon, visiting a cafe and refuelling. Their next known stop was in the early morning of Saturday, the 10th of July, when they were back in New South Wales to get petrol at Hay. Later that morning, they spent half an hour at Gindera, near Albury, to refuel again. They had one final stop for petrol in the afternoon at Maroolin, outside Goulburn, before all three returned to Sydney's west. Once they were back in Sydney, two of the crew were tested and found to be positive.
That's their route and how they went through. They did cover quite a bit of mileage there, but I mean, looking at those conditions, and that's how it all started and all began. Well, right now, so what's going to happen in New South Wales? The Premier says that tougher flags and restrictions might be on the table.
Day after day, Sydney-siders have been answering the call. Some have queued for hours and hours to do so.
Can I in particular also thank members of the Fairfield local government area.
Whether the appeal is in English,
please come and do the test,
or other languages like Assyrian,
please the test.
The message is sinking in.
Initially, the testing rates were a little bit low. Over the past few days, there has been a surge in testing.
So much so, a new record has been set, 77,000 tests in one day. But the results are worrying. Fairfield is still home to about 3/4 of new infections.
We still have to maintain those testing rates. Otherwise, we can have a surge in numbers over the next few days, particularly if they're still circulating in the community.
Around half of the 97 new cases were infectious in the community.
And this is the number that is concerning. That number of people being infectious in the community keeps going up.
There's also concern about the spread of COVID in healthcare settings. A patient at Liverpool Hospital tested positive on Tuesday. Now a staff member has been infected. They also worked at Campbelltown Hospital. Colleagues have been forced into self-isolation.
I am aware that there have been exposures in healthcare settings that have led to transmission, but our staff do wear PPE.
Cleaners at Westmead Hospital say their PPE isn't enough. They're refusing to enter the COVID ward where a nurse tested positive.
The cleaners are really scared. Some of these cleaners were not vaccinated and wanted to be vaccinated. And the very important thing of having a respiration mask that is fitted, and they weren't fitted.
A spokesperson for Westmead says it adheres to strict infection control guidelines and it will continue to work with our staff to address any concerns raised.
They'll still have to resolve the issues at some point, but whatever they want, they will have.
With the weekend approaching, health officials are pleading with people here in Fairfield to keep getting tested. They'd also like to see higher vaccination rates. A new hub has opened not far from here, prioritising teachers and aged care workers. The early signs are promising with a strong turnout on day one. Jeremy?
Kathleen, there's been a COVID scare in regional New South Wales.
Jeremy, we've been told a confirmed case travelled to Molong near Orange in the central west today. Urgent contact tracing is now happening and a pop-up testing clinic will be set up in the town. In Sydney, health alerts have been issued for almost 30 venues from Bondi Junction to Liverpool. All the details are available on the health website.
Kathleen Calderwood, thank you. Let's go straight to Manly now, where police have broken up a street party. Our crime reporter Mark Reddy is live for us. Mark, what happened?
Jazz, a man was fined $1,000 after hosting an illegal street party here in Manly last night. Take a look at this mobile phone vision. The 23-year-old jumps onto the roof of his van and then starts blaring loud music. That's when other revellers join in, including a toddler. Well, police took only a few minutes to shut down the party, and this weekend they'll be launching a 72-hour operation targeting Sydney-siders who they say are disguising their holidays as business trips.
If people want to travel outside of the Greater Sydney area, they will be stopped by police. If they're not stopped by police, the local communities will dob them in.
The Deputy Premier's daughter was also fined $1,000. Dominica Barilaro was caught travelling from Queanbeyan on the ACT border right through to Sydney and then returning home. The police say she was very apologetic and helpful with the investigation. John Barilaro, though, wouldn't make any public comment other than to say this is a private matter and it's not in the public interest. Jeremy?
Mark Reddy reporting.
It might be a private matter, but, is it in public interest? So, we need to be very, very careful. Well, right now, our Prime Minister is announcing that, all the frontline workers there should be vaccinated. Well, shouldn't that have been done ages ago? That was the plan all the while, that all the frontline workers, all the ones who actually deal with the, patients and be healthcare workers and other ones be vaccinated and make sure that they are vaccinated. So here's that announcement.
We agreed for mandatory vaccination and testing of all quarantine workers and all workers directly and indirectly involved in managed quarantine, including workers involved in the transport of quarantined individuals. And the reasons for that regarding recent experience, I think, is fairly self-evident. It will be a state responsibility, and the state will address any issues that they need to address to support their vaccination program of those mandated workers.
Have that achieved by?
Sorry?
You want to have mandatory vaccination of quarantine workers achieved by?
As soon as possible. I mean, this was a matter that we had regularly discussed at National Cabinet, and there is still, I would say, a small distance to cover in this area, but still a distance nonetheless. And recent events has highlighted where some of those gaps may be, and the states will move quickly to close those gaps.
Like the need to try to get it done as quickly as possible, such as like putting a target of September in the same way you have for aged care?
Well, I'll leave that to the states and territories because they're the ones who will be undertaking that work. But you can put that to each of the states and territories about when they believe they'll be able to achieve that by.
And as the Prime Minister mentioned that, there are, of course, rules and regulations that can be put down by the federal government, but then the onus is on the states to deliver on those. And as he mentioned before, that this was always the case, always the intention, and always the discussion by the National Cabinet, to make sure that vaccinated people only, or the frontline workers were vaccinated ahead of everybody else. And that's just common sense that, I see here every day because there's a quarantine hotel very close to where we are. And I can see them, all the busloads coming from the airport. So there's a police car that comes in and they'll close off the street. Then we have to cross the street, go across, then go along the street, then cross on the other side. So, all those precautionary measures are happening. But there are people who are bringing them in. There are people who are letting them in, who are working with them. And common sense would say that, all those workers are protected, or people who are dealing with them, handling whatever they might be. I've seen food deliveries come in and many things that they would only be people who have been vaccinated or and with the PPE. With the protective clothing, they would be the only ones because, what's the sense of going to all this expense of having a quarantine hotel and then making it very vulnerable for, by not following the strict rules and guidelines and people just come in willy-nilly. So, these are the kind of things that really, really need to be taken. And raising this kind of concerns also is a very young president of the Medical Association in Sydney, and she does mention that tougher restrictions need to be taken in place. Just have a listen to her report on what she is saying, when you look at the GPs and the president of the Medical Association, they're getting younger and younger by the day.
Well, let's now return to our top story this morning. And the COVID-19 outbreak in New South Wales continues to grow, and Victoria enters the second day of their 5-day snap lockdown as authorities work to contain the Delta variant.
For more, let's speak now to Dr. Danielle McMullen, who is the New South Wales President of the Australian Medical Association. Dr. McMullen, thanks very much for your time this morning. So we've got a lockdown in Melbourne and we've got a lockdown in Sydney as well, but the settings are different between the two. For example, when it comes to retail is closed in Melbourne, but that's not defined in Sydney. Let's talk about Sydney. What do you make of the settings in place there?
Look, what we've seen in Sydney is that despite the measures that we've got in place, that number of people who are infectious in the community and our unlinked cases continues to grow, which just shows that our settings aren't strong enough and we haven't managed to get our arms around this cluster. And so we do think that New South Wales needs to take stronger measures as soon as they possibly can to try and get on top of this cluster, particularly around southwest Sydney, but we know it remains a risk across broader Greater Sydney.
What should those stronger measures look like?
Look, we think, as you said, that non-essential retail still being open sends the wrong message to community and also to workers who retail workers often can't make that decision for themselves about whether to go to work or not. And really it's up to retail owners, but we think up to the government just to tell them that non-essential retail and industry shouldn't be open at this time. We also think that a rethink of that restriction on how far from your home you can travel to exercise would again signal to the community that a 5k radius is a smaller radius than that 10 kilometres we've got at the moment in Sydney.
The important number, as the authorities keep saying, is the number of cases that are out in the community while infectious. And in Sydney, that number still remains high. What does that mean for the spread and the potential length of the lockdown there?
What it means is that you've got people who don't know they have the virus. I've got to emphasise this isn't people knowingly doing the wrong thing, but it means they are out and about and potentially seeding new lines of transmission. This Delta variant is different to what we have seen before in that it is much easier to spread, and people without knowing it are spreading it to all of their household contacts and potentially in more of their workplace or contacts in retail sort of settings. So the more people we have who are infectious in the community, the more new lines of transmission we have, the more mystery cases we have, and then it's just harder for those contact tracers to get ahead of the spread.
Let's look now at Victoria and in Melbourne, and we're seeing a longer list of exposure sites there, and also cases of what authorities are calling fleeting transmission, where the virus is being spread to people who don't even know each other, so haven't really come into close contact. Do you think that 5 days will be enough in Victoria?
It's really hard to say. They've certainly taken a different approach to New South Wales, and they're hoping that going hard and fast with a low number of cases and across the whole state will get around it. But we've just seen that Delta is so different and so easy to spread. As you said, the fact that we've seen that fleeting transmission in places like the MCG really is a concern. So I hope for their sake that it is a successful short lockdown. Melbourne's had it hard through this pandemic, and we certainly don't need both of our big cities in long lockdown, so I certainly hope it is enough.
Dr. McMullen, you're a GP. I'm just wondering how GPs are coping with the vaccination rollout at the moment, particularly with the changes in advice when it comes to the AstraZeneca, with the changes from ATAGI recommending a shorter time frame between the first and the second dose in those outbreak areas. How are GPs going with communicating to their patients, and has the communication from authorities and from the governments been enough?
Look, it's certainly been a roller coaster. It does feel like there are new changes every day when I turn up to work as a GP these days. But we are trying our hardest to keep on top of it. And obviously as the AMA and I know other medical organisations are trying to get that information out to doctors as well, because we have heard those reports from people that they've watched the news and they've approached their GP and the GP hasn't necessarily been also watching the news that day. So it is a really rapidly changing area, and doctors we know across the state and across the country are doing their best to keep up with the changing guidelines. We do have good supplies of AstraZeneca in most places, so our strong advice is to get vaccinated, particularly if you're over 60. Make sure you're getting vaccinated as soon as possible, and for those under 60, we think that doctors should be across now that under 60s can have an AstraZeneca, particularly in these outbreak areas if they choose to, and that dose interval should be shortened, again, only in Greater Sydney and perhaps in Melbourne at this stage, but those areas where there is an outbreak, we shorten the dose, but otherwise it's still the 12 weeks.
When you say that some GPs are not watching the news and therefore not up to date with the latest information, that would suggest that the direct line of communication to GPs is falling short.
Yeah, that has been a challenge throughout the pandemic. Governments, I know, are now trying to get to us both through state health departments and more frequent updates. I have seen an improvement there in the past couple of weeks, but still I'm sure you've heard many times that these press conferences in the middle of the day, we had some really awful situations where we would be for example, when they changed the age limit from 50 to 60 for AstraZeneca, we were in the middle of vaccine clinics and sort of the next patient of the day turning up and saying, "Doc, no, I'm no longer eligible. Didn't you hear? They just announced it 5 minutes ago." So there really have been some challenges, but we are really trying to work together as a community and make the best of the information we've got.
Just finally, Dr McMullen, we are also seeing transmission happen at health facilities. There's a nurse at Westmead Hospital, for example, that's tested positive, who's worked in the COVID ward. Staff at Liverpool Hospital are also in isolation after a patient tested positive. Are the procedures in place at our health facilities enough to protect healthcare workers, in your view?
Hospitals have had 18 months to prepare for this, and we do think we've got good supplies of PPE at the moment. All healthcare workers and staff in hospitals and healthcare settings should be vaccinated now, but this does show that even with vaccines, COVID is a very contagious illness, and so even with vaccines and with PPE, we are unfortunately seeing some healthcare worker infections. Those are always of concern to us, but what we do hope is that because these people are vaccinated, their illness will be less severe at least, but it certainly shows that despite all the best measures in place, COVID is still very contagious, and that's concerning.
Dr Danielle McMullen, we really appreciate you.
Dr. McMullen, thank you very much for that report as well. And as I mentioned before, that they're getting younger by the day. Look, when we have this kind of discussion and when we stream this news on the public forum, we do welcome comments by everyone because it's on a public forum. And as JP Soli says, that what a mess. Why don't people listen and abide by lockdown rules? Correct, I do agree with that. But then there are people who take advantage of our feed and put in some silly comments like, promoting their services. So please don't do that. This is a news channel, and if you like to put on relevant comments, yeah, that's fine, and we can agree to disagree. That's okay as well. But please, be relevant, and it is not advertising your tantric sort of services on this channel. Well, right now, let's move on and take a look at. If you look at Casey Biggs, he's a very good analyst, and he analyzes the situation every day, and quite thorough in his analysis and his way of describing. So let's take a look at, let's join him as he takes a closer look at all these lockdowns and the situation.
We start with the biggest wave, 97 cases today in New South Wales. A lot of those, up to 51 of them, spent some time in the community while infectious. So I just want to clarify what I mean when I say that. They were not isolated for some or all of their infectious period, or we don't know what their isolation status was through their infectious period at this point, but 51 is a lot. The one thing that I'd like to know a little bit more about today's cases is we've seen a big step up in testing. Let me just show you the overall statewide testing numbers. 77,600 tests were reported today. What a fantastic number that is. It's a daily record for New South Wales, and a lot of them, an absolute lot of them, were in the city of Fairfield and surrounding areas. That's the Western Sydney hotspots we've been talking about. A big surge in testing rates there in just the last couple of days, in part driven by a big increase in the amount of surveillance testing. This is the testing of workers who need to leave Fairfield, who now have to get a test every 3 days to ensure that they're negative and they're not seeding outbreaks elsewhere. So the big question, I think, for today is how many of these 97 cases have come from this first big day of surveillance testing results, and is that significant? By definition, any case that's been picked up through surveillance testing is almost certainly asymptomatic or symptomless. They almost certainly have not been isolating through their infectious period. So if this is a significant number of those cases, that would go some way to explaining why the numbers are up today. Of course, it would also indicate to us that there are a lot of undetected chains of transmission in the community, which is not a good thing. The only silver lining to that is if the cases exist, we do want to know about them as soon as possible to curtail their spread and try and put a stop to this. So that's one of the sort of unresolved questions. How many cases have come from that surveillance testing? Is it significant? If it is significant, that might actually be a good reason, a good argument for you to then impose some sort of testing blitz on an even greater level in that area to really try and stamp out any undetected spread. We know that, well, the Premier, the government has made it, dropped some pretty strong hints that some more restrictions or some more rules or some kind of other measures are going to be imposed at some point. They're keen to look at targeting what those responses look like, whether it's in particular industries where we're seeing, particular industries in workplaces where we're seeing more spread, whether it's particular areas we're seeing more spread, whether it's things like testing blitzes. I have no idea, but that is one place I'd start looking, is how much unlinked transmission are we still seeing in Fairfield? I suspect, we know it's more than elsewhere. I suspect it's still significant.
And of course, the other big part of the other sort of half of all of this is vaccination rates and how we're going with the vaccination rollout. We've actually had quite a good day, right?
Yeah, a record number of doses today, 175,000 or so, and we're setting records in numbers of doses every few days. It's just continuing to creep up and up. 34.5%, so it's 34.4%. These numbers don't make a gigantic difference to the overall percentage, but if every day we can get 0.1%, we'll eventually get our way close to 113% of people have both doses of a vaccine. This number, of course, growing quite a bit faster than this one at the moment, as we're seeing lots of AstraZeneca second doses are occurring. And let's just have a quick look at how the progress is going on a state-by-state basis. Yeah, we're seeing a bit of picking up of the pace in some of these states down the bottom, South Australia, New South Wales and WA. Getting close to a third of people in New South Wales now have a first dose of a vaccine.
So there we are, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Well, right now let's take a commercial break and a message from our sponsors, GlobeNet Realty.
GlobeNet Realty. GlobeNet Realty has been the longest established, trusted and respected agency in its trade area. Washa Chandra, Director of GlobeNet Realty, provides honest and ethical service to her customers. If you are thinking of investing in Brisbane real estate market, or if you are seeking professional property management, then you should contact Usha Chandra today on landline 3865 4466 or mobile 0419 775 416. And for further updates, log on to our website www.globenetralty.com.au. GlobeNet Realty is your own local real estate agency. Situated at Shop 52281 Sandgate Road, Boondall. GlobeNet Realty. Real estate is our world.
And it definitely is. And don't forget that on every Wednesday, we have the real estate update right here with Usha Chandra. Well, right now, as we know, Gopio Queensland is planning the India Day Fair to happen once again this year. and it has now been shifted from Roma Street Parklands to South Bank Piazza. Reason being, it's a more controlled venue, easy to monitor the number of people actually coming in rather than a big open park. It is now in a controlled venue, and of course the much needed undercover venue which can fit more people in the seating area than Roma Street Parklands. I mean, I'm talking about the seating area. Of course, we can, outside on the grounds and everything, we can have more people at Roma Street, at the amphitheatre precinct as well. So right now, talking about and serving her support for India Day Fair is Councillor Angela Owen.
What I'll do.
Hello everyone, I'm Councillor Angela Owen, and it's with great pleasure once again that I throw my support behind India Day Fair to be held this year on the 15th of August at Suncorp Piazza at South Bank in Brisbane. This is for many years, and it is wonderful to know that it is continuing and growing from strength to strength.
And strength to strength, it is growing, and of course inviting all the youngsters is Ishana Chandra.
Hello everyone, my name is Ishana Chandra and I would like to invite you to Gopia Queensland's India Day Fair at South Bank Piazza on the 15th of August. A free, fun-filled family event celebrating India's independence, a new venue and bigger, bolder programming. See you all there!
And yes, we'd like to see you all there in the other functions and events. When we talk about other functions and events, as we know, that last night was the Punjabi Welfare Association of Australia and their function, Pinky Singh and her team. They did a wonderful job. It was a very, very good function and almost... well, completely house full, sold out event at Michael's Oriental. And of course, when you look at, I've attended quite a few functions lately, is people come in with their mask. You're standing up, you have to have your mask. But of course, people start talking, then they take their masks off. Then once you sit down, you're allowed to take your mask off. So, but those are the rules, and people are following those rules, and functions are taking place in accordance with those rules. Well, right now, let's take a look at some of the other functions and events taking place or being planned for Brisbane. So, ladies and gentlemen, they were up to date on Australian and Indian radio, and those were some of the functions and events taking place in and around Brisbane. They're not a lot. There might be some others that we might not be aware of or have not been sent to us. So, if you have any functions or event that you'd like shared with us on the show, quite welcome to so that here. So if all you need to do is just send it to us, and we will include that into the program as well. And as I mentioned, that there are functions and events that are all taking place. Even today and tomorrow is a very, very busy day. Now, of course, looking around the world, if you look at Fiji, the number of cases are growing there. India has been hit with some, on top of everything else that's happening, some natural disasters there, and the situation is quite grave in South Africa as well. All the reports that are coming out, there's about 212 people who have died in those riots. It is very, very sad to see what's happening there. Next week, I'll try and see if I can get on the show Pele Ramdhani, to talk to us about the situation, to see what's happening, and of course our counterparts there, our GoPio chapters. We have got quite a few GoPio chapters there, and we keep getting the report on our WhatsApp group, but I'd like to bring someone who can actually talk about the situation there and see what it is all like. And right here in Brisbane, our face mask that has been extended for another week, and of course Sydney and Melbourne are in lockdown at this point in time. So that's what we have. That's what the weekend is looking like. And it is challenging times that we do live in, but we are adaptable. We are quite adaptable. That's for sure. And people do quickly adapt around things and manage things. So it's not like that. Oh my God, how are we going to do this? Of course, there is uncertainty. There is anxiety, and of course, look, if anyone's going through any mental issues, please do reach out. Do reach out. There's so many different organizations beyond Blue and others. If you are in dire straits, if you are facing any kind of depression, or you might not even know, but if you have any symptoms, and if you'd like to reach out, please do reach out. Help is available. You are not alone. Always keep a tab on friends and family. Just a quick call. Just say, hey, how are you going? You don't need to be there talking for hours and hours, but just be in touch. That means a lot to people. That there are people whom they can talk to and rely upon. So, in this kind of times, it is very, very important to look after each other, meaning not physically, but actually, being in touch, even that is quite enough. So right now, it's goodbye from me, from this segment. Until Monday, it's goodbye from me. Thank you so much for being on the show. Be good and remain safe.